Welcome to another episode of Growth Hacker TV. I'm Bronson Taylor, and today I have Siqi Chen with us. Siqi, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited.
Absolutely. I think it's going to be a great interview. You're an entrepreneur, started your own company, sold that company, starting a new company. You kind of been there, done that, and you've grown a lot of things. So I think there's going to be a lot of value in this interview for people. But let's start at the beginning, because it seems like you kind of got into the growth stage almost on accident, and maybe I read that wrong, but it seems that you kind of fell into this growth stuff. Talk to us about Mafia. It seems like the first thing that really grew that you were a part of.
Yeah, it definitely was an accident. So I started Mafia about a month after the Facebook platform came out, and actually a week before it came out, I was playing a game of diplomacy with some Y Combinator friends I had when I first moved into the city. And we spent a whole day and whole night playing it. It was like a 12-hour game. I think it was like 2 hours per turn. Mm-hmm. And right about then was when they announced the platform. And I thought games was going to be a pretty big category there. And I thought a game like Diplomacy would have been a really good fit for the platform, given it's social and it's asynchronous. So I wanted to build Diplomacy for the Facebook platform, but that ended up being too difficult. So instead I built Mafia, because all you had to do was vote. But it had the same sort of like game mechanics in terms of, it's like it's social, it involves like people interacting with people. Yeah. So that took about 2 weeks to set up, and I launched it, invited some of my friends to play, and it just grew organically from there. Those were the good old days of the Facebook platform, where pretty much anything could grow if you had a little bit of viral tuning. Particularly, that was when Facebook invites and requests were still an API call, so you could just do it on the back end. So that grew to about 100,000 daily active users pretty quickly. And I was, at the time, working full-time for a company called PowerSet, which was a search engine startup. And on the side, I was making like $1,000 a day or more in like ad revenue. Mm-hmm. And so word got around, and eventually my co-founder said, hey, let's build something together. And we built our next game, Friends for Sale.
What did you learn about viral growth during this time? I mean, is the lesson just be early on new platforms, or is there anything more fundamental that you walked away from learning from Mafia?
So at this stage, there really wasn't a whole lot of growth hacking learnings or growth learnings, because the platform itself was so easy at a time. You really didn't have to know a lot or spend a lot of time thinking about it. At the same time, I was only one person, and I just built this game as a hobby. So that wasn't quite, I didn't quite get a lot out of it, but I was very surprised that we were able to get 100,000 daily active users just from invites. Mm-hmm. But for our next game, the process of building Mafia did get me thinking about what is the infrastructure required for like success on a social platform. Mm-hmm. So for the next game, the first thing that Alex and I did is we built a metrics platform before we built a game. So we built this dashboard that plugs right into SQL with our standard tables, and we're able to track growth, referrals, retention, and from there we built Friends for Sale. But the funny thing is, we spent a bunch of time building the metrics platform, and we ended up never using it because when you tune it right and the APIs are fine, then you end up growing faster than you can scale it. So we're like, okay, well, we're not going to scale this metrics platform, and we're going to scale Friends for Sale, because now we're getting 100,000 users every day, and we're having trouble even staying up.
Yeah. No, that's so interesting. I just had the CEO of Bump on the program, and he said the same thing. He said he doesn't actually have good data about his company because they're growing so fast. They don't collect it, and they don't really care about it. So it's so interesting that when things really, really work, metrics don't matter as much in some kind of counterintuitive way. So it's interesting to hear you say the same exact thing. How many people eventually did you acquire with Friends for Sale?
So at our peak, we had close to 5 million daily users. We've reached just about everyone on the Facebook platform at the time. This is late 2007, reached over 100 million unique users.
Wow.
And in monthly active users, I think we're at our peak 15 to 20
Yeah.
monthly active, and this is the only advertising or growth hacking we've ever done. Well, really just advertising was we Alex and I each invited like 30 of our friends to the app. That's all we've ever done, and it's just organic from there.
Wow. And so, with the first one with Mafia, you said there wasn't a lot of takeaways because it was so easy. Is it the same thing with Friends for Sale? There's just not a lot of takeaways because it really was just invite 30 people and watch the fire grow?
So I think we were inspired a little bit around game mechanics for distribution, and also because Friends for Sale stuck around for a long time, eventually was financing our entire company. We ended up working on it for a lot longer. So there are a lot more learnings from Friends for Sale. And we actually built out this dashboard we call Serious Infection that I've shown around in presentations before that we scaled to support that kind of infrastructure.
Yeah.
But the first thing that we learned in Friends for Sale is this is a hypothesis we had before we built Friends for Sale, which was that if we can fully make use of the Facebook social graph and make it feel like your friends are already users, which we felt was a core strength of the platform itself, right? It solves sort of the cold start problem of when you build a new social product, how do you get anyone on it and how do you not have an empty room? And I think this actually, I've talked to a number of social game developers, and they call this technique this Friends for Sale hack, because we were actually the first people to do this.
Wow.
Which was that make all of your friends look like they're already played a game, and you can just go in and interact with them, and every interaction ends up being an implicit social communication, right? So the really, really simple implementation that we had was, okay, before the Facebook platform, if you were to build something like Friends for Sale, and for people who don't know what Friends for Sale is, it's basically a game where you buy and sell people in this market economy, and their prices go up and down, and you make them their pets. And before the Facebook platform, if you were to make a game like that, then you would probably make people register, and then when you go in, you can see all of the million users that you have who you can buy, and then maybe you can see 2 of your friends if you connect with Facebook, right? But with the Facebook platform, we just made your entire social graph purchasable. Right? It looks like every one of your 500 friends are playing already. They all have a price, and you can click a button, and by clicking a button, you actually just buy them directly. And on the back end, you send them an invite or notification, and you get notified with this really mysterious notification. Hey, your friend Ryan just bought you for $500. Do you want to buy him? So that worked out really, really well. People came in, and just through the process of playing the game, we were able to grow. So the 2 learnings are, one is, hey, it's really, really effective to make it seem like all of your friends are already playing and be able to directly interact. And 2, if you can make your viral loops core to the game mechanic itself. In our case, our game was all about buying your friends. So if through that action you get a viral notification, then that's a really strong organic growth channel.
Yeah, that's great. And you mentioned something there. Also, you mentioned infectious dashboard. Did I hear that right?
Serious Infection, because our company was called Serious Business.
Yeah, so tell me about that.
So Serious Infection is a metrics platform that we built about a year into Serious Business. And what it did is, so the most useful thing was that it did A/B testing for viral copy automatically.
Wow.
So that was really interesting. So what we did is we wrote our own templating language, and we used this templating language for request copy, notification copy, all our viral copy. And so in our code, all we had to do was have an if statement and have one version of copy in one version of copy, another version of copy, and then it would go through our server, and our server was able to detect that these 2 copies are different, and automatically create an experiment for it, automatically generate results. So there's no A/B testing setup. It's just you change the text, and you automatically create a A/B test, which was really, really convenient, really, really powerful. So we were just able to quickly create an if statement with 10 different copy, and it would automatically have the experiment completely set up. And eventually, we wanted to get to a point where it automatically determined the results too, so it would be auto-optimizing. So that was the main feature, but it was effectively contingent. And the Contagion guys actually told me that they based Contagion off of what we shared about our own metric system.
Yeah. Is that platform still available for use, or is it just something you used internally back then? It's not out there anymore?
It was part of the IP that Zynga acquired after we acquired.
There you go. So let's talk about that. So your company, Serious Business, was eventually acquired by Zynga. Now, you were at Zynga during the kind of height of their growth, when they were just, taking market share like crazy, growing like crazy. What did you learn about growth from being at Zynga? I mean, you already had growth kind of in your veins when you got there, but what did you learn from maybe their culture or their philosophies or their unique way of viewing the world that really kind of added to your repertoire?
Wow, so much. I mean, Zynga, they were obviously the best in the industry, so they knew things people didn't know. But in particular, I think there's sort of a cultural difference between Zynga and I think most smaller startups in the space. If you look at the independent developers, we sort of grew up probably bootstrapped, and we were able to get this small viral app to a million users just organically. And for a small team with not a lot of capital to get that kind of distribution, it's hard to not be influenced and get religious about it. And I think Slide in particular, but Slide exemplified this, but this is endemic of all the other independent developers, which was that, because we are good at growth hacking, we are religiously against paid user acquisition. And I think the main thing about Zynga is that they are not in any way religious about anything. So when they launch something, it's paid user acquisition, it's growth hacking, it's game design to make sure users stick, it's everything. They throw the book at this product and they make it work. As a small startup, sometimes you can't afford to do that depending on the business model. So the other thing I learned is that you need to match your user acquisition strategy to the market that you're in. So for a purely social product that relies on massive network effects and you have to reach scale before you can see meaningful revenue, like say a Twitter or a Facebook, then you probably want to dial down on the paid user acquisition and tweak the growth hacking lever way up. But for something like a social game or content business in general, where you have a limited window to monetize your users because it's Farmville or Cityville or any game is not going to be around forever the way you can expect probably something like Twitter or Facebook is, then you need to be able to monetize it quickly. And because you can immediately monetize these users, then it's worth it to get paid user acquisition early. So we didn't understand the market that we were in, right? Like if we were to do it again, we would double down on pay user acquisition and juice up our lifetime value and try to grow that way.
Yeah, no, that's great insight. Is there anything that you kind of brought to the culture at Zynga? I mean, I know you said that you learned so much from being around them. What did you bring to the table where you were like, hey guys, consider this. This might help.
So two things. Well, I think the most important thing, but this is something I didn't bring fresh out from the outside, right? Fresh from the outside, I think the independent developers were probably better on average than Zynga at pure virality. And what I mean by that is just new user acquisition installs. But the thing about Zynga that most people didn't know at the time was that Zynga was the best at using the social channels for retention and engagement. And that simple fact is really the cause of Zynga's success above and beyond everyone else in the industry. I'm pretty plugged in with most of the independent social gaming developers at the time, and that point was just something no one was aware of.
Really?
And in fact, if any of those people were aware of it, a lot of those companies would have been competitive.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's the smallest things, and sometimes it's obvious now, but at the time, no one was thinking that way other than Zynga. So that's one thing we brought from the outside. But after being in Zynga for about a year, the one thing I did try to influence in terms of product strategy was the importance of retention. Yeah. And also, you mentioned I had some countercultural views around product design. So
Absolutely.
some of those opinions started bubbling up too. So the limitations of metrics, how I have this favorite saying, which is retention is actually the best growth hack because it's sustainable. So that's something that I was able to influence a little bit in my role as Zynga.
Yeah, and we're going to dive into that a lot more in a little bit because I'm really interested in your views on those things. One more question about Zynga. You know, at one point at Zynga, you had a few different roles there, but at one point you served as the director of product. Do you think that product decisions affect the growth potential of a product, or are there always more factors that matter more? How core is product to growth, I guess, is the ultimate question.
I think it's incredibly important to growth. So it depends on, so growth is sort of this time dependent variable, right? Like growth over what time period and growth, how quickly and how sustainable are all quantitative variables for that term. So if you want sustainable long-term growth that will get you to Farmville numbers in a platform environment that isn't Farmville-like, that doesn't have all the low friction, high conversion social channels, and product is pretty much everything. And you can see the contrast directly, right? So if you look at mobile products versus Facebook products, right? Mobile products tend to be highly polished. The successful ones tend to be highly polished, highly engaging. But at the same time on mobile, you don't have these like low friction distribution channels. But as a result, you have to rely on the inherent quality of your product to retain and get distribution through word of mouth, which is its own kind of virality that people don't like to talk about. But when you have these highly lubricated social channels, then the incentives become, let's try to reduce the friction and optimize these growth channels as much as possible, and often at the expense of the product.
Yeah, no, that's great. So now let's talk about some of your countercultural views on design. I've heard you say before that you think metrics can bias our design decisions. What do you mean by that? How do metrics bias our design decisions?
So what I've seen in practice is that, so some context around this is that Serious Business was an intensely data-driven company. And in fact, I was asked at a conference about how can you measure everything? And like, what if you can't measure everything? And my answer to that was there's two kinds of companies, right? One is, you look at what you can measure, and because you can't measure everything, let's just sort of ignore the data and go with our gut. And the other type of company is, well, you can't measure everything, so instead let's try to measure as much as we can and more over time. So actually, eventually we're going to get closer to measuring everything. And I said Serious Business is definitely the latter kind of company. I definitely wouldn't build a company that way. So the reason why I say that is because once you are intensely data-driven, and I know like you can say that, oh, you can try to avoid these problems, but I'm saying these are sort of natural symptoms that you would have to actively work against.
Sure.
And a lot of it, and it's hard to even be conscious of it when you're in the middle of it. But the side effects are, one is it sort of replaces thinking and communication and debate in a team, right? Okay. So if you're talking about a design decision, and instead of like talking through the pros and cons of it, how it affects the overall product, because I don't think product decisions can be made just in isolation. They affect sort of this whole. You just end up, oh, let's just test it, right? Like, forget the decision. And then that becomes a replacement for thinking. It becomes a replacement for thinking about how things affect overall product. It becomes a replacement for even thinking about, are the things you're testing even that important, right? And I think the 43 Shades of Blue, the classic Google story, is a great example of it. Like, that's just broken. And I think that's a place where you naturally end up in if you're not aware of the limitations of it. The other more practical issues around pure data-driven development is that the data, you're naturally going to be biased to building things that you can test very quickly. And not all things that deliver user value are of that class, right? But you're going to be biased against from doing those things that actually deliver value. And the other part is you're also going to be biased towards building things that you can see the results of very quickly. And not everything that you build, you can see the results of quickly, right? So I think Ben Silverman said of the Lean Startup book, it's like, if I read this book when I was building Pinterest, Pinterest wouldn't exist because I would have gave up, right? Because all the data says it wasn't going to work. But it took time for it to work. And these are biases that I think are rather subtle, that if you're not aware of, then you end up with a company that's purely data-driven, and you end up with a bad product. And I don't know if you've seen this, but there is an extremely high correlation between very data-driven companies and products and very ugly products.
Really? I never really thought about it.
But I mean, like, I don't want to name any products or companies, but the ones that seem like are talk about data and A/B testing, everything, are also the ones that just look like crap.
That's great. That's awesome to know. Then what role do you think metrics should play? Because you said, serious business was very metrics driven in a lot of ways. You're not saying metrics don't have a role. You may be saying they're not the main thing. They're not the only thing. So what's the right role for metrics? How should a company incorporate them?
Metrics are a tool. And so I think I just believe in balance in many, many things, whether it's team management or process. And where I think metrics falls down is if there is no balance, right? It's all about the data. All decisions are purely metric driven. I am a huge fan of Facebook's product team and how they articulated role of data. They didn't call it, everyone calls it data-driven development, right? They call it data-informed development and design, which I really think is accurate, right? Metrics are important. You want to measure as much as you can, but it should not be the driving factor behind design and product decisions. But at the same time, if you are making design and product decisions, it is very, very useful to respect and be aware of the data that you have.
Yeah. Do you think that overall this newfound excitement around metrics is a net win or a net loss for startups? Do you think we've gained overall because of all this emphasis or not?
I think it's a net gain overall. If I would rather be slightly too data driven than have no data at all and just rely on instinct. I think that's the state in which most startups were before metrics and Lean Startup. So I think it's a net win.
Yeah, that's great. So you talked about being data informed. So what are some of the tools that you personally use to inform yourself with the data? Maybe it's apps you use, maybe it's in-house things you build that you consistently do with different products. But what are some of the tools in your kind of toolkit?
So at Serious Business, it was purely serious infection and raw SQL calls. And Zynga has their own internal analytics system, Z-Track, which is very, very sophisticated and powerful.
I'm sure it is.
And I mean, it's actually human-powered, which is really interesting.
What do you mean by that?
So they have a team of analysts who write reports, custom SQL reports for any question that you want. So it's instead of building this tool by engineers, you can just do custom one-off queries by throwing it over the analyst wall, and these team of amazing people will write a custom report just for you, and they'll save it, and everyone else can use it. It's a really interesting system.
Is that more efficient than having an engineer design something? Is that why they did it that way?
So there's costs and benefits. So the costs are sort of there's obviously the human cost of actually having a whole team of analysts doing this. And also there's some inefficiencies in that, sometimes reports will be written twice. But the benefits are, I think, well worth it, at least in this case, given the size of their company. Because any question that you have, it reduces the cost of getting the answer to it, right? Because if it's an engineering sort of driven metrics tool, then you have to prioritize saying, is this question worth asking? Should we build it? But you don't have to ask a question like that. You just I just want to know. And once you build it once, then everyone can just use it. So it's sort of brute force, but it works really, really well, which is sort of Zynga's culture. So yeah, I think it works pretty good.
Yeah. Any other tools besides the ones you've listed there that you go to?
So at my new startup, the main one is probably Mixpanel.
Yeah.
Really easy to integrate. The tools work well.
Hmm.
But eventually, we're going to have to roll our own. I mean, I think any large consumer startup inevitably gets to a point where you have to roll your own.
Yeah. Where do you think that line ends? Like, where does Mixpanel end and roll your own begin? What do you need that you think you're going to push the limits of Mixpanel just to help our audience because they may be in the same situation where they're hitting the limit of certain things?
I think it's a function of scale and functionality.
Mm-hmm.
So past, say, 1 million users, it can just become cheaper to build your own.
That's true because Mixpanel is charging by the event calls, so that could become very pricey if you're actually building something with true growth.
That's right.
Yeah.
And if you want to do more sophisticated queries than just like raw A/B testing or demographics or an overall funnel, if you want to get raw user insights through writing custom queries, then you kind of have to roll your own too.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Now, one of your favorite quotes is from Steve Jobs. I think we all have a favorite Steve Jobs quote somewhere in us.
Yeah.
But yours is, design isn't about how things look, it's about how things work. And I think that kind of speaks to the things that you've been talking about here. But what does that quote mean to you?
Well, the first part is that it just addresses a common misperception about what design is, right? I think people see design as a surface level veneer you put on products, and they look at the iPhone or the iPod as, oh, this is an amazing skin on a music player. But I think what it ties for me is I've been getting into sort of like Zen Buddhism lately, and it sort of informs how I think about product and data too. It also suggests that great things, great products are an integral whole that can't just be separated and tested, aspect by aspect. So how things work is not just the surface level, it's everything about this product. It's how it all fits together. It's so fit and finish. It's workmanship. It's everything that you don't do. And the third part is it also suggests that design isn't just graphics. It's problem solving, which I enjoy. So I just like that quote a lot.
Yeah, no, it's a great quote. I'm a designer myself, so I love looking at that to kind of put things in perspective. Now, after Zynga, you've been working on your own stealth startup, and it's at hey.co, which is a great domain name, by the way. I'm sure you already know that. And the name of the company is Heyday. Is that correct?
We're now Hey Inc., and we're making a product called Heyday.
Okay, so Hey Inc. is making Heyday. So I know you haven't released much. I went on the website, I read the FAQ, I looked at kind of what you had up there. I can maybe make some guesses as to what you guys are going to do or try to do. But what can you tell us about Heyday? Is there anything you can release about this app and what it's going to do?
There's not much I can say about what the app is supposed to do. I can tell you a little bit about the genesis of this idea as it relates to growth hacking. It's actually really appropriate. So after I left Zynga, or even while I was there, I was thinking about what I wanted to do for the next company. And I was looking at things that are successful, right? And there are exactly 3 companies that have over $1 billion of market cap that were started in the last 10 years. It's Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. That's it.
Wow.
And all of these have network effects. So I was thinking about things that work and things that didn't. So when I think about things that don't work as well, I think about maybe some of the games we made a serious business where it was highly successful for a time, but eventually it has a life cycle and it dies. And things that are successful seem to have this attribute of being able to acquire a user and keep them forever. So the only criteria for our new idea, our new startup, is it had to be a product that we believe was going to be around forever, and such that we can acquire a user and have a pretty good idea that this person will use the product forever.
Yeah.
And so we were thinking about what are some ideas that could get us there. And one of the frameworks for coming up with a good idea is like, what are some really foundational human needs that are improved, that can be improved by technology, right? Facebook is like social, right? Everyone needs to interact with other people, and they make it better and make it more efficient to share. So for us, one of those foundational human needs is memory. So we're trying to solve that with new technology.
I'm very interested. When do you guys think you might be launching it? Any ideas?
Within the year.
Within the year.
We're pretty far along. We have a small beta testing list, and the feedback so far has been pretty strong.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we're all waiting with bated breath to see Heyday. Now, you also make investments in startups from time to time. When you go to make an investment, I'm sure you're looking at the startup to see if it has growth potential. I mean, before doing Heyday, you were thinking, okay, what are the largest businesses ever in technology, and let me try to do something that can have that kind of market cap. What do you look at within a startup to kind of, size them up to see if they have growth potential?
So I wish there was a more formal process for me, but for me, it's pretty intuitive. It's a combination of product and team. I'm not much of a markets-driven thesis kind of person. So the first thing is team. Like, I'm going to Skype with them and see if there's like this spark, like, are they, is there founder market fit, founder product fit, which I find pretty important. So in one case, I invested in this great team called ChirpMe, and they're doing social dating on Facebook, doing really well. And the thing that made me invest is they were extremely creative growth hackers, right? And that's sort of what you need to succeed in that kind of business. In this other case, I invested in a company called FlashSoft, and I just liked the technology. It just like fit into how I thought the current state of art could be improved. So it's fairly intuitive, but so far I've got my money back at least, and the rest, we'll see.
Well, that's more than most people can say who play the investment games. That's good. As you interact with startups, because you interact with them all the time, what do you think that many startups get wrong about growth? Are there any themes that you see that they are consistently just off?
There is. And the obvious one is, there's this recent, the open graph spam companies that have like blown up and then sort of just went nowhere. So this idea of growth at all costs and growth as without thinking about the sustainability of it seems to be a large waste of a startup's resources. So back to like one of my other favorite quotes is retention is the best growth hack, right? Like, any company you can like bring a few growth hackers in, through engineering resources at growth hacking, and figure out how to grow for a time, right? That's not a difficult part. I think that's like knowledge is becoming increasingly commoditized as growth hacking becomes more and more popular. What's still difficult and what still is required to build a company of sustainable value is how do you make a product that users will use for a very, very long time? And I think that the mistake that a lot of startups make is they focus on growth over retention first. And I think growth hacking and virality is a force multiplier, and you have to have something strong to multiply first.
That's a great quote, and that might be the quote of the episode, that retention is the greatest growth hack. I love that one. This has been an awesome interview, Siqi. Is there any final advice that you can give to any startup that's trying to grow? Any parting words of wisdom?
I think I said it. Retention is the best.
There you go. I say we end on the high note. That's awesome. Well, Siqi, thank you so much for coming on the program and for taking time out of your busy schedule to share your immense knowledge.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.